Welcome everyone to episode 44 of Ty's Training Talking with My Dad. This is a double episode. We had a week off, so we are going to be covering the weeks of March 2nd and March 9th. I'm Ty, and here as always with my co-host and father, Mr. C, aka Tim Andrews, for another look at training and life ahead of Project Himalaya. Mr. C, how's it going over there?
It's going well. Almost all the snow is gone, which we say yay. But it's a little cold, but we'll get there. So generally going well.
Excellent. Well, hopefully it'll be gone by the time I get to Boston in just about 3 weeks from when we're recording this for a quick stopover on the way to Nepal, as we've done the last couple trips now. A very hectic 4 to 48 hours being made even more hectic right now because of the travel complications,
chaos.
Let's just say. Travel chaos. But yeah, I'm excited to be there and excited to talk training over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're excited to see you. Okay, well, let's dive in then.
All right.
So let's talk about 2 weeks ago, starting with March 2nd. And just after you went up Cotopaxi. So you just finished that big block with that huge, massive 18-hour experience on Cotopaxi, which you did of your own volition, which always amazes all of us in the audience. How did your body feel in those first few days afterwards, in those first few recovery days, and how much did that incredibly massive session take out of you?
So actually, let me just do a quick pivot because I want to give a quick shout out to a book I just finished, and I wasn't even planning to do this, but the way you phrased that question reminded me of it. It was a book called by this guy, Matt Fitzgerald, who's a sports writer. He writes a lot about running and endurance and stuff, and he wrote this book called The Other Talent, which I just read about. And basically the kind of theme or hypothesis of that book is that everyone who's like a really super elite athlete has this key set of, basically the way he puts it is they have a screw loose, but they have their shit together. And you kind of can't have one or the other and be really, really successful. And, the screw loose, and I think that I've always had the screw loose, and I've kind of at times had my shit together and at times not, which maybe explains some of my successes and some failures. But I actually I really related to what he was talking about because, a lot of the way he describes the screw loose stuff is basically you have to be willing to just do really outrageous shit and make really outrageous sacrifices because you really care about the thing that you're pursuing and trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good example of that. It's I'm spending 18 hours walking up and down the same, whatever it was, 700 feet of this hill or something, not very much, but just walking up and down all night, all day. As much as I hope and expect and want this whole season and project to go well, I think, especially this season, I do feel like I haven't, there's no more time in my day. I can't train any harder. I don't think I can train much smarter. I feel like I've really dialed it in and I'm really proud of what I've been doing. And I think it's this combination of, yes, being crazy enough to pretty much reject all social norms and whatever, going to bed at ridiculous hours, getting up at ridiculous hours, doing really outrageous training, while doing it in a way that is smart and makes sense and is working towards this goal and is patient and all these other things we've talked about. So anyways, it's a really fascinating book and I related to it a lot. And I don't think it's necessarily just about sports. I think you could apply kind of that same idea to, starting a business or music or whatever it is. But I think it's this idea of just having this kind of animal craziness of just, I'm just going to do whatever it takes, and then coupling that with this, quote unquote, having your shit together in the sense that you can funnel it into a way that is productive and not destructive. I think that was the really interesting part to me, is that kind of, it almost sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. And there's a lot of interesting examples in the book. Anyway, so there's my shout out for the day. To get back to your question, going way back to the beginning of March, that session definitely kicked my ass. I think it was not only a hard session, but obviously it was 36 or 40 hours without sleeping. You know how much I love my sleep, so that's a big disruption. And luckily the timing worked out pretty well in that we got back to Quito. Connor was still here at that point, and we'd kind of planned to have a really, really relaxed couple of days. I mean, the next day I literally just went for a walk with Connor and Anna in the woods, and I was this is my training for today. Is walking in the woods for an hour and a half or something, and that was all that I had. and then kind of easing back into it. So it definitely was really, really hard stimulus, but also I felt like it took a little bit longer to recover than I expected. But, when we talked about it in the last episode, this was why I wanted to do it in, late February, early March, and not closer to Nepal, when I felt like I had a little bit more room for error. Okay, if I need to take one more recovery day, or if I have kind of a bad workout coming back, it's not really a big deal, because we're still, quite a ways out from the main objective at that point, and there's still a lot of time to recover. So overall, I'd say, now with a couple weeks of hindsight, great session, learned a ton, really valuable, but definitely just as hard on the recovery side as expected.
Okay. And I have to comment on your point about that book. It's an interesting thing because, as you know, I've done a few startup companies and they are insane. So you do have to have that. And part of the problem is there's so much, at least in the US in particular, in a lot of places, all the self-help motivation is follow your passion. But This is sort of, it's like different levels of infinity in mathematics. So there's passion and then there's passion. And most people have what I would call passion with a small p. They're interested in something, but they're not going to do 18 hours on Cotopaxi. Okay, they're just not going to.
Yeah.
So, when you're trying to do something at the very edge of performance, human performance, whether it's athletic or business or anything else, you got to be willing to do 18 hours on Cotopaxi if you need to. And you have to have enough passion with a capital P and a capital A and all capital letters that you're willing to do that, because it means so much to you. And if there's one thing I will say, most of the successful ones that you hear about, most of them didn't care about the money. It really was, I just want to do this. I need to do this. It's not in 100%, but it's I would say it's 80+%. And so it's an interesting thing. And so caveat emptor to those who think they have passion, just remember there are levels of passion. And if you really want to get to the very tippity top, man, you have got to just be willing to lie on the train tracks multiple times for it. So anyway, okay, well, let's move on. Then you went to Papayacta, is that how you say it? Which is a bath resort kind of place, I think, right? And you did contrasting baths in the hot springs, as I assume partly for fun and partly for R&R and rest and recovery. So walk us through your recovery protocol, and did you choose that place specifically for recovery after Cotopaxi?
Yeah, Papayacta is a really nice spot. It's only like an hour and a half from Quito, so that was a big part of it. Part of it was my partner Anna's birthday, and we wanted to just do a little get out of town, get away for a night or two, and it's a beautiful place. It was still up in the mountains, great hiking, and it was also, it worked out really well because it's a very popular place that people from Quito go during the weekend, and we went on like a Tuesday, so it was empty, like we were the only people there, which was really, really nice. And also, I personally really, really enjoy the immersion in different temperatures of liquid, for lack of a better word, the kind of hot springs, cold springs, back and forth. I feel like that I always feel a lot better. I don't know if there's any actual science there, but subjectively, it feels really good. It makes my very sore legs feel less bad. So that was really nice. And the fact that it was just close by was a really nice thing. And just being able to go out and spend a bunch of time soaking in the water and walking around in some beautiful forests and stuff, it was a great time. And like I said, those couple of days right after that huge effort were really penciled in as just like kind of whatever in terms of exercise, just getting out, walking around a little bit, hiking a little bit, maybe biking a little bit, things like that. Really nothing at all strenuous or structured for those first 3 or 4 days after that huge effort, because I really wanted to be pretty cautious going forward.
Okay, cool. And then you went sort of back to work, if you will, the real work, and you were a little disappointed in your first double T day, block 3. You said you felt heavy. You were behind the whole time where you thought you would be, called it a C- kind of day, despite still being faster than you were last year on the same course. What was going on physically, and how do you deal with that? How do you process such a disappointing session when the data says you're still moving forward?
I think it's well, first of all, one of the nice things about this whole block has been there haven't really been any really bad days. Like, this is honestly probably the worst workout I've had this entire season. And it was okay. It was fine. Like you said, it was actually better than the workout. Like I did the exact same workout last year and it was like a minute or two faster. To be disappointed and still be a minute or two faster than last year on the worst day of my season is actually, in retrospect, when you zoom out, it's like, okay, that's a really good result, because we've talked about so many times, it's not about having 1 or 2 A+ workouts. It's about having very few or no F- workouts and having a whole bunch of Bs. And that's, I feel like, how this whole season has been. Like every single day, I literally haven't had a single day where I've been like, oh my gosh, that was like terrible. I didn't get anything accomplished. It was awful, whatever. Like I've had none of those. And so that's one of the things that I look back most strongly on. And when I look forward towards Nepal, it's like, okay, if we can just keep that trend going of having, pretty good days, a couple really good days here and there, a couple kind of shitty days, and the rest are just fine, then we're going to be great. In the moment though, it's definitely easier said than done. And it's easy to let the maybe ego get a little bit in the way. I think this one in particular, it's weird because sometimes I feel like the first day of a block goes really, really well because I've had these 3 or 4 really light days between blocks. And so I do give myself kind of permission to be like, okay, I'm going to go, do something, whether it's an FKT or something just a little bit flashier in the workout. And so I think I felt pretty decent that morning and was just surprised that I didn't feel as poppy as I expected. And again, in retrospect, zooming out, I think it's just that huge 18-hour day, 3 or 4 days is maybe that's enough if I finish the block with just, a hard double T day. But when you finish the block with, what's close to like 100-mile race in terms of effort, that probably takes more than 3 or 4 days to recover from. And I saw, some parity between kind of like the lactate and heart rate and effort and all this stuff. And I just felt like my body wasn't quite ready to work hard again. And I think I realized that pretty quickly. So it was less of, oh my gosh, I'm not fit. It was more just like, oh, I'm just not recovered. And that's fine. And I just need to adjust. And I know we're going to talk about that afternoon right after this, but that was, I feel like, even more a reflection of that. It wasn't so much like, oh, I'm bummed that this workout that I had all this stuff riding on didn't go well. It wasn't that at all. It was just, oh, I guess I'm not recovered quite yet. And I need to like ease into this block a little bit. And now again, with the hindsight of a couple of weeks, I'm able to see that that was totally the right call.
Okay. And then let's talk about the afternoon. So paradoxically, your PM session, your heart rate was way higher than you expected. So again, part of here is you had certain expectations and they seemed to be off. So you were 165 to 168 on the first rep when you don't usually even get above 160 and you're trying to stay below your lactate threshold, right?
Yeah.
And you backed off and you did the rest at 9 kilometers per hour instead of 10 kilometers per hour. So was it hard? Was it difficult to sort of set that aside because you had this expectation and that expectation was violated and you had to slow down in the middle of your workout?
I think, it was a little bit surprising just how drastic it was, but it was the same attitude as the morning where it was just like, okay, like I'm not ready. You brought up a really interesting point, which is just this idea that I have that it's not what I expected. And I feel like when I'm in a training block like this, or I'm like in the middle of it, in the thick of it, really in the weeds, I just feel like I know exactly how I'm going to feel and what my heart rate's going to be. And, all these things, I have a really, really good sense of that. And so when that is off, it's more a sense of, okay, like something else is going on. And then in this case, it was really obvious that this is just the recovery from this huge effort. There was, I don't know, people are insecure, including me. And there's definitely a little tiny voice in your head that's like, oh my God, you've lost all your fitness because you took 3 days of recovery or something. But like, then the rational side of you is like, okay, thank you for that, brain. That's not correct. Obviously, we know that. But what it means is,
Vice President of catastrophizing, we call that voice.
Exactly. Yeah. But what it means is, again, we're just not recovered. We're not recovered from this humongous session that was 4 or 5 days ago. And so the right thing, and again, I'm proud of myself in this moment because it would have been very, here's the thing that's funny is that, previous seasons, and this is where the lactate testing and all the stuff with human powered health has been really helpful. I would have just done that workout at the right speed, but at the wrong heart rate, which it probably would have taken me longer to recover if I had done that. But because I went into this workout not saying, okay, I need to run this at a certain speed, but okay, I need to run this at a certain intensity in a certain zone of lactate production right at threshold, which is how I've always done these reps, I can see, okay, this speed is way too high for whatever reason. Probably there's just like muscular fatigue going on and I'm not firing on all cylinders, so to speak. And yeah, so I needed to back the speed off by 10%, which is a ton and was pretty surprising. But then again, with the benefit of hindsight now, I can say, a few days later, I was able to like be right back to normal and everything was fine. So I think this whole day was just a very clear example to me of, okay, I bit off a little bit more than I could chew a little too early. But I think the difference, and again, this goes back to what we were saying about, having a screw loose and your shit together. Maybe this is the shit together side, is I was able to say, okay, it's okay. Like I can still get the cardiovascular stimulus I need. I just need to back off the speed and not worry about it and not stress out about it and not think that, oh my gosh, I've lost all my fitness.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a sign of maturity in a couple of dimensions. You're always learning and you've discovered a new critical variable, which is lactate versus heart rate or running speed or whatever.
Yeah.
So you have it, and you're mature enough to take it seriously, even when it overrides the things you've done for years, and say, nope, this is the one that I should be focusing on. And I'm just going to do that, even if it's contradictory to some of the other things that I'm used to doing. Yeah. Okay. On the weekend, on Saturday, you had a big revelation about something as simple as a little fan. So it's amazing what you can learn in the middle of a complex set of tasks. And you used a fan in the gym, you said, for the first time, and noted this almost certainly explains some of why this went so well. So walk us through the session. You did 10 by 7 minutes at the lactate threshold where your HR never even got close to 160, and you were watching Righteous Gemstones instead of listening to music.
So the fan, yeah, I've thought about using a fan before, especially my gym that I have here in my apartment building gets very, very hot during the day, and it was super sunny and has been, and I decided, might as well just grab a cheap box fan and see what it does. And yeah, I don't know if it was all that. I'd like to give some of it to just fitness and rebound from that huge effort. Again, we're talking about Saturday, and that other workout was Wednesday. So that was kind of the C- workout. And then 3 days later, this was like an A+ workout. So it's funny how quickly things can change. And sometimes you just need to wait a couple days, but it was a really, really good one. It was just felt like the effort was right where it needed to be. The heart rate was lower than I thought, and mentally just felt super chill. Like you said, I was watching TV. I wasn't even really doing anything super focused. It didn't feel like a very hard session. It just felt a little bit long, it's whatever it is, 80 or 90 minutes on the treadmill, but it still felt very, very comfortable. And I do think some of that can definitely be put to just there's less cardiac drift because of heat, but I'll take it. I don't need to over explain. I think it was a really good workout, and I was very happy with it.
Okay, yeah. In fact, you called it the best workout you've done this season in terms of speed, length, reps, HR, and perceived exertion. So anything you want to add about what really clicked, and what does this tell you about your fitness trajectory?
I think, well, I'd say two things. One is that it kind of validated all of the stuff that I was just saying about the previous workout, that obviously there's no loss of fitness. If anything, I think when you do a really big effort like that and you do a couple months of really consistent training, this is what you would expect to see. You would expect to see objective, quantifiable improvements in fitness. And that's as much as, the treadmill can be a little bit mind melting at sometimes. It's actually a very helpful tool in terms of those quantifiable comparisons, because there's a lot less external stuff to factor in, even from compared to like going outside and running on the same trail every day. There's weather, there's wetness, whatever there is that can change a trail from one day to the next. But you do a treadmill on the same gym on the same machine, every week for 2 months, like you're going to have some really comparable data. And so yeah, to be able to run 70 minutes of work with 6 minutes of rest, 9 minutes of rest, and then comparing that to like the first workout I did back in January, where I think it was like 20 times 2 minutes. So that's 40 minutes of work with 20 minutes of rest. It's a humongous difference, especially when you think about, okay, not only is the volume to rest ratio just 3.5 times higher, but also the perceived exertion is lower, the heart rate's lower, the lactate's lower, all these things that are just showing you, okay, you've gotten better at this thing. Like that's the whole point of training, right? Is like you got better at it. And it's nice to have objective measurements of that aren't just subjective, that aren't just how I felt, that are saying, okay, yeah, like the same thing with the gym stuff. Like it's really nice to be able to see, oh, I did 10 kilos on my left side single leg calf raise, and now I can do 50. Like that's a really like exciting and positive piece of data to like reflect on after a couple of months.
Yeah, terrific. Okay. And then you called, you said you did much better in the PM as well. You've been struggling with these 12 by 90 cardiovascular intervals a couple of times, but you finally ran them well. You were able to hold the 13.5 kilometers per hour with your HR never getting above 170. And you noted in your log, I wanted to make sure I felt really good about each stepping stone. So talk about this process and approach of repeating workouts until you get them where you want them.
I think this is another thing where I've tried to just be a little bit more conservative or cautious this year. I think in the past, if I had kind of like a B- workout, generally the way that I progress my workouts is, these lactate threshold reps we're doing, and they get a little bit longer, and the same thing with the CV, which is critical velocity, which is more like between 5K and 10K pace running. So like 15 to 30 minute effort. It's not quite VO2 max, but it's definitely above lactate threshold. It's a significantly higher pace zone. So yeah, like 5K, 10K effort for like a, elite male runner. Mm-hmm. And so normally I would just kind of keep increasing those from week to week in the same way that I would the LT reps. And I felt like, I think I did, these 90-second ones, like two times before this one. So I did exactly the same workout 3 times, basically. Probably wasn't 3 weeks in a row, but it was probably 3 times in 4 weeks or something. And I just felt like the first 2 times it felt too hard. I was struggling. I couldn't quite get through the whole workout. And I really wanted to feel super solid, because I do think this stepping stone analogy is a good one, or lily pads, or whatever one you want to think of, where, or a staircase, mm-hmm. right? Where, you're getting from one thing to the next. And in order to be ready to do the next workout, which, surprise, would be like, a minute 45 as opposed to a minute 30. There's nothing, nothing fancy about any of this. But in order to do that, like, I want to be really confident that the 90-second reps were appropriate and that I was able to handle it well. And I think this one, like, third time was the charm. I was actually able to do that workout really well, and it felt good and it felt controlled. It never felt like I was really straining or I had to like cheat and grab the handrail or anything like that. So I think this was, again, it's just something that I've been trying to do differently. I think in the past I probably would have just gone right to the next one and been like, it'll be fine. And hope for the best. And then maybe sometimes you're actually getting a little bit ahead of your fitness in terms of what the workouts are demanding. So that's been a goal this year, has to have the workouts always feel like they're achievable, that it's not like I'm going into a race where, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. It's like, okay, I have this workout, but I did it last week and this one is only a little bit harder than that. And so I'm pretty sure I can do that one. And then it's like compound interest where, there's no one change that's very big, but when you look at the difference between day 1 and day 100, it's really different.
Okay. Yeah. Well, congratulations then.
Thank you.
Glad you got there. So you did note also one thing about the relationship between lactate, heart rate, and effort. So your lactate hit 13.3 that day, which is very high for you. Yeah. But your heart rate was lower than previous sessions at this intensity. So you wrote this is a very interesting relationship between lactate, HR, effort, and speed. Yeah. So what are you learning about this effort? What made it interesting?
Well, I'm learning that they're less coupled than I thought they were. I think is the short answer. Yeah, I still don't really understand it. I definitely thought there was more of a one-to-one between, especially between heart rate and lactate. And also when you factor in perceived exertion or effort and then speed, you would think that those things would be relatively correlated, but I have seen that they are not always perfectly correlated. And I think this is why, people who are really into the whole lactate testing side of training are very specific that heart rate is not a perfect replacement for lactate testing. It can be a pretty good stand-in, and as can perceived exertion. But I think this is a really good example where if you look at my sessions before, where I was basically hitting the same lactate, but my heart rate was 178 instead of 168, which to me that's a really big difference because that's getting pretty close to my max heart rate. Something different is happening there. I don't know what it is, but it's showing me that there's still a lot to learn on the lactate side, and there's less of a perfect correlation between all these things than I thought there was originally. And luckily, Anna brought a whole bunch more strips from the UK because the company that I use is based in the UK. And so now we have a lot more lactate strips, and we'll be doing even more testing to bore you guys with our lactate discussions.
Excellent. No, I think it's a good point. it's not surprising to me because, since I sort of dabble in biology and modeling and systems theory, so it's a model, right? You have this
Right.
model of the relationship between these variables, but it's a model. It's not the actual world. And models always, to give everybody a good SAT word, models always elide a lot of the world because that allows you to focus on the critical variables of interest and plot them. In other words, it hides a lot of information so you can concentrate on what you think is important. And a lot of people they think it's mechanical, right? They think, well, this A is connected to B and A, 2A implies 2B or whatever. There's a very mechanical, static relationship. But what they forget is that the human body is 100 trillion or so cells, and each of those cells is more complicated than anything anybody's ever dreamed of. So the complexity of the entire system, and it's all dynamic. They're not just sitting there, they're doing things actively. And so it's really quite complicated. And so the model are hardly ever even close to perfect because of that fact that there's all these other factors that oftentimes are below threshold. So you can get away with using these models, but sometimes aren't. And so, even simple things like everybody thinks, oh, well, they're like switches, your heart rate is X or your heart rate is Y, and it goes up because you work harder. That's sort of true, and there's chemical signals that do that, but it's not like the chemical signal turns on and nothing else happens. Actually, the chemical signals are always fighting each other. They're always pushing one way, back and forth. And even if the chemical signal is overwhelming in one direction, there's still some going the other way. There's just enough that it's making the difference to push things in one direction. So it's quite complicated. And if things just shift a little bit, that can have enormous cascading impacts across lots of systems. So, most of the time it works, but it's not always going to work. And I think the one thing that has been discovered through the work of Inigo San Millan and lots of others is that lactate is the bigger driver, right? Lactate is a bigger driver of when are you going to basically collapse and die, not have the ability to fuel yourself any longer, and to a certain extent, I'm grandly oversimplifying. And so heart rate isn't as good because sometimes your lactate is somewhere and your heart rate isn't perfectly correlated. Anyway. Okay, well, let's move on.
I think, let me chime in real quick, and I think we'll get to this when we talk about the big workout the next week. But one of the other things that I've found is that so heart rate is a very noisy variable, and like you're saying, that it's impacted by a lot of different things in your body. For example, like if you eat a really rich sugary meal, your heart rate will go up just like sitting around. And that'll impact you in exercise. Right. Lactate is also a noisy variable, and that it can be affected by other things. So one of the things, and I remember Dr. Inigo saying this on our call, is that it can be basically what you're metabolizing during exercise, whether you're metabolizing carbohydrate or fat, will impact your lactate production. So when you're metabolizing carbohydrate, the glycolysis that's happening produces more lactate than metabolism of fat, I believe is my understanding, which I actually saw very clearly in this. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is next week that we're talking about. But anyways, I just wanted to point out, I think lactate, it can be more precise, but it's not perfect because it's also, and also altitude and hypoxia are things that also impact lactate production.
Nothing is perfect, right?
There's lots of, like you said, it's an incredibly complex system, and we're looking for the simplest ways to make predictions about our bodies and how we feel based on, like you said, this unbelievably complex biological system. And all this going back to this idea of, these four things that I'm paying attention to, which are effort, speed, lactate, and heart rate. How are these things related? And I think there's still a lot to learn there.
Yep. Good points. Okay. On Sunday, you did a Pinchincha traverse, but before that, you were pretty sick, apparently. And you said you were really sick to my stomach, ended up dry heaving, puking a bit of stomach bile. So I hope people aren't listening to this as they eat or right before they eat.
Trigger warning, yeah.
You called this a yellow flag and said it's happened before. So what happened? What do you think causes this, and how worried should you be?
I'm not particularly worried. It's a weird thing that happens every once in a while. It actually started like after my first Everest season, where I threw up really high up on the mountain and then a couple times on the way down. And then it happened like a handful of times in like a couple weeks over when I got down and like was back in Concord, and I was like a little bit weirded out. I think it has to do with a combination of taking a lot of caffeine on an empty stomach and being overtired. Basically, those are the only real common denominators I can find, which luckily are pretty easy to deal with because I just get more sleep and have a little bit less caffeine or have something in my stomach in the morning, and then it doesn't seem to be an issue. So yeah, it was definitely a little bit weird. I felt bad because, Anna and I planned this big day hiking together, and like getting up super early in the morning, and then I'm like puking in the bathroom. She's like, "Oh no, we're not going hiking today." I'm like, "I'll be fine, don't worry about it." Like, and then I felt completely fine like 5 minutes later. It's just all of a sudden this like gross wave of nausea comes over, and I'm like, "Oh no, I know what's gonna happen." And then but luckily then it's all fine. So it was in the end it was a great day, and it was not a big deal, but it was a little bit alarming in the moment.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why I think people put milk into their tea and coffee, is because milk and cream, yogurt, whatever. That's why they put yogurt into spicy food as well. Helps your stomach deal with things that it's not used to.
Yeah.
And coats, does a whole bunch of things that help a little bit. So yeah, maybe a little something. Doesn't have to be milk or yogurt or whatever, but something that just keeps your stomach a little bit calmer if you're drinking a lot of acidic, tea or coffee or whatever.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're feeling better. You're feeling better, right?
Oh yeah, again, this was almost 2 weeks ago probably.
Well, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second week. So now we're into the second week after Sunday, and you're building up to your end of week big hypoxic session, another one of these big sessions, which we'll talk about. So you on Monday you did a Stairmaster, a lot of work on the Stairmaster, and your HR was even lower than it had been before. You never got over 125 until hitting level 18 on the Stairmaster in the final 200 meters. So, and that's 2 hours, as I understood, 2+ hours. So you call this another significant step change from even a week or two ago. So what do you think is happening there? Is this just better fitness on your part, physiologically?
Yeah, I think it's just, this is training working. Connor, who's been a guest on our show a handful of times now, we kind of joke that we're always surprised when training just works. Like you just do this stuff every week and you're like, okay, but then, every once in a while there's something on the schedule and it looks really hard or something, and you're like, oh, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. And you can just do it because that's training is it works. And I think this is just like we were talking about with the treadmill stuff too. It's the same thing with the fast stuff as it is with the, kind of slower easy day stuff, it's just really nice to have objective feedback that says, yeah, you're fitter. Like, okay, you can do 2 hours at a significantly higher intensity. I think it's each of those little settings on the Stairmaster is probably 5 or 6%. So, 5 to 10% faster at the same intensity that you were doing it, 2 to 6 weeks ago, whatever it is. That's really, really cool to see, because it's, again, this idea of trickle down, where not only are we seeing it on the really fast days, the hard structured days, but really actually what we care about is the zone 2 stuff, because that's what I'm going to do on Everest. Like, I'm not going to be in zone 4 on Everest. I'm going to be slogging along for 20 hours up the hill.
Yep.
And so what really matters is, okay, am I more efficient? Can I move at a higher speed at a heart rate of 125 to 145? Like, that's actually the only thing that I care about. Everything else is just to accomplish that. And it's really nice to see the progression, again, not only on the fast days, but on these easy days, and seeing that that's working, that, okay, yes, we're getting faster on these easy days, whether it's on the Polichowski or on the Stairmaster. There's real significant gains there that are happening, that are not just about my sensations, but they're quantifiable about heart rate and lactate and speed and all these other things.
Great. Yes, we're glad to see that things work as they're supposed to work. Effort pays off. And you also cranked up the mask and the hypoxic mechanics to 9,000 meters, or is it 9,000? Yeah, about 9,000 meters. So you bumped the altitude bike up to 9,000, which is higher than Everest, right? Which, well, not much. It's about 8,800 and something.
It's in the right ballpark.
Yeah. So walk us through why now is the right time to do this, and what you're feeling, how you're feeling at these levels.
I think it's, well,
you can say hi to Thea if you want.
Hello, Theodosia. That's the cat. If you're not watching on YouTube, she's joined us. It's the right time just because it's again, going back to the idea of lily pads or steps or whatever analogy you want to use, it's, this is the next lily pad. I've been at a little over 8,000 meters for about 2 weeks, and that's about usually how long I spend at each altitude, and then I crank it up another 500 to 1,000 meters, and so now we're at 9,000, which is just about the max of the machine. I think we'll do one more crank. I think it can get up to maybe like 9.5 or something before I leave for Nepal, and then it can get much higher once we're over in Kare, up to 10 or 11,000 meters. But again, the idea is just that progressive overload, the same exact thing that we were talking about with training. The idea is, okay, there's no huge jumps. It's just a little bit every couple of weeks. And then, by the end of the season, you've gone from starting at 5,000 meters to 11,000 meters. And that seems like a lot. And that is a big, huge jump to do in one session. But when you do it over 3 or 4 months, it's actually not that terrible. Now that we're recording this, I think I've been at 9,000 for almost 2 weeks, and it's felt pretty good, not terrible. It definitely feels hard those first couple of sessions, but there's definitely some pretty quick adaptation that happens within those first couple days, and then kind of longer term adaptation that happens more slowly. But there's definitely a lot that happens in the first 1 or 2 sessions and starts to feel quite a bit better after that. I do find just a little bit more brain fog. So I've, like you mentioned, watching Righteous Gemstones, which is a HBO show that Connor recommended. So I've been watching that instead of reading a little bit, just because my brain couldn't quite deal with reading. So we'll see. Maybe that's my cue to when I can crank it up one more notch, is when I can actually start reading a book again, as opposed to watching dumb TV.
Okay. Yes, you're starving your brain for oxygen so much you can't read anymore. So when you can get enough oxygen back that you can read. I just don't really
want to. That's the thing.
Yeah. Okay. It's just harder than you want it to be, right? Okay. And then after Saturday's breakthrough session that we talked about, Tuesday you said was, in your words, a bit of a regression to the mean, sort of a BB plus day instead of an A plus day. You noted this is fine in the middle of a block. How do you manage expectations when every session can't be a breakthrough? We talked about this a little before, but maybe you can add some here.
Yeah, I think it's just recognizing that it's an expectations versus reality thing, and just saying, okay, BB pluses are great. That's what we're shooting for. And every once in a while, you're going to have an A plus day, and it's going to be really awesome, and it's going to feel great. And then every once in a while, you're going to have a C minus day, and that's going to feel kind of shitty. And neither of them matter that much. What matters more is that every other day is a B plus day, and that there's, a balance of really good days and kind of not as good days, and that there's ideally no really, really bad days. I think that's kind of the ideal mindset that I try to take to all these workouts. Now, whether I implement that perfectly is probably up to interpretation. It's very easy to say that now, separated from everything. But in the moment, obviously, you want every day to be an A plus day, but it's not realistic. And so I think going into it with that expectation that, okay, if I do everything and I just do a bunch of B plus days, I'm just going to keep getting fitter, as we were just talking about. And as I've seen over these first, 2.5 months of this buildup, that's exactly what we need. It's not possible to have an A plus day every day, because eventually you just move the goalposts, and then your A plus days become B plus days, right? It's the point of the A plus day is that it's the outlier. The point of the BB plus day is that is the mean. So when we talk about regression to the mean, it's that idea that you have a really great performance, and then I think some people, including me, a lot of the time you have a tendency to raise the bar, move the goalposts, whatever sports analogy you want to use, and say, okay, this is my new baseline. But really, no, it's not. It's okay. It was a really good day, and that's great. But also, we should keep the goalposts where they are, and just keep kicking the ball through them or whatever. I don't know enough about football to be able to pull this analogy off. Keep the goalposts in the same place.
Don't move the goalposts.
Hitting that free throw every time.
You don't want to move the goalposts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And we talked about this a little before, but this is where I caught it. You wrote that your first workout on January 23rd was 20 by 2 minutes at 225 kiloschmenzers, right? Yeah. And average HR was 153. And these reps were 4 times longer, nearly double the total volume, and average HR was 152, and you called it a mediocre day, BB plus, whatever. So, you talked a little bit about this. Is there anything you want to add about this importance of recording and really paying attention to the bigger picture, and how much progress you've actually made in such a fairly short period of time since January?
I think we covered this pretty well before. I think I even cited this exact workout, so apologies for
you did
jumping ahead here. And I think it's almost a reminder to myself, and like I can see that when I see my own quote from the log, where it's like, okay, this is me reminding myself that even though this workout didn't feel that good in the moment because of that whole regression to the mean thing we were just talking about, it's actually still like a really, really good session. And it's really good progress objectively. You know, this is me taking the emotional ego side of myself and being like, no, actually, this is pretty good, dude. Like, don't worry about it. Like, that's what I'm doing in my log to myself. And so I think that's
Right.
like, that's the important thing, is just staying focused on the trend and seeing, okay, this, you know, even January 23rd is almost 2 months ago, but looking at this as, okay, this is a really good step. This is just what we need to do in terms of the lily pad. The workout was executed well, and it's a huge, you're like way fitter than you were 2 months ago. Like, that's awesome. So don't beat yourself up about it. Basically, I think it's basically just me doing positive self-talk in my.
No, it's good. And it is good. I think it's important. Not even necessarily positive self-talk. It's remembering a little bit of objectivity and just using the data to say, oh yeah, okay, I made some progress. And we also talked about this one before, because I noted you went from single leg calf raises of 10 kilograms to 40 kilograms by March 10th. And, you know, that's right? That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot about doing that, but how does this relate to climbing performance and your confidence in climbing Mount Everest?
So the biggest thing is not just that the left side went from 10 to 40, but that the right side went from probably like 25 to 40. So that means two things. One is that I had a really big asymmetry on my right and left side before, which I knew. My left side is the side that I got surgery on 2 years ago, and I've had a lot of trouble getting that side back to kind of symmetric strength. So not only is there an increase in strength on both sides, but it's much, much more symmetric now, which is really, to me, that's maybe the most exciting thing, because I think it's caused me problems before where that side has started to fail. And then once you have an imbalance of strength, then that can lead to like compensation injuries and all kinds of things. So I think it's good for my confidence. It's good for climbing performance, because when you're climbing on steep snow in crampons that's not, you know, vertical, you're basically walking on your tiptoes a lot of the time. So you're really working your calves. And if you have a pain or a problem on one side, it's really easy for that to become pretty debilitating. So that's huge. And mostly I just feel like it's trickle down in the same way that we were talking about kind of high end aerobic stuff trickling down to, you know, zone 2 is, I think it trickles down in the same way that when you have anything in the kinetic chain that's a problem, I think fixing it, all of a sudden just everything feels better. Everything gets stronger, everything gets more efficient. And what we're talking about, again, with a very long record, is efficiency. A lot of that is, okay, we know there's going to be some breakdown in mechanics and efficiency because it's just so long. But the less that we can have that break, the later we can have those breakdowns start to happen, the better that's going to be. And that's why we've been putting in so much time at the gym this season with Daniel, and just all the PT that I'm doing every single day, is to make my body as strong, as bulletproof as possible going into the season, so that my fitness is the last thing that I have to worry about. You know, I can be 100% sure of my fitness, of my body. Obviously, it's Everest. There's other stuff to worry about. There's the ropes, the snow, the weather, the people, whatever it is, the crevasses. There's so much other shit to stress out about. And hopefully the idea is, okay, we can go into it knowing that my body is as strong, healthy, fit, ready to go as possible. And then we can deal with problems as they arise.
Okay. And you had a nice brunch because you had some friends in town, Ryan and Sarah Hall and Chris Fisher and Aaron Ton, and you had some other friends, and you all had a big brunch. So inquiring minds want to know what a brunch like that is like when you've got all these elite athletes in Quito, and what do those conversations look like?
I mean, honestly, the conversations are like the same that I would have with any of my non-runner friends. A lot of it is just about, you know, enjoying being down here, people's family, people's kids, you know, the usual. Maybe there's a little bit of kind of training and racing and goal talk, but mostly, you know, these are all normal people, which is, especially for Ryan and Sarah. I mean, Chris and Aaron are more my peers. Ryan and Sarah, you know, I've I've known who Ryan and Sarah were for much longer than they have known who I was. I'll just say, Ryan was the king of the marathon in the United States back in like 2007, 2008 when I was kind of just getting into running and I was still in high school. And so to have him like eating brunch in my house with my friends is still a little bit of like a pinch me moment, but they're just such wonderful and kind people that it's kind of become normal at this point. But honestly, I think it is a little bit of a reflection of just that keto is a really awesome place to train. I think I've kind of been pitching that to people for like a very long time, and I think most people don't listen to it. But I've been lucky enough to be able to, have a handful of people take me up on the offer to come down here and train, or like Ryan and Sarah just found it on their own because they were just looking for a place at, around 9,000 feet of that had decent weather, and that's kind of how I found keto a long time ago as well. But it's really cool to see high level athletes both in the marathoning and road running space as well as in the trail and mountain space who are coming down here, because I think it really is a world-class place to train for both of those things. And I think it speaks really highly of Ecuador that there's just so many awesome people that want to spend time in this place. It's a really fantastic city. It's a fantastic country. People are awesome. I think it really does reflect well on keto, on Ecuador, that we have kind of developed this small little athlete community down here. And I think it's a world-class place to train. It's a great place.
That's great. Okay. Public service announcement. World-class place to train in Quito.
Yeah.
If you're an athlete looking for high altitude.
Yep.
Okay. So now let's talk about the another one of your passion projects, the 7-hour plus plan. So walk us through the design of this session. Why 6 to 8 hours? Why the 9,000 meter altitude? Why 12 to 13 kilograms of weight? So you had weight on your backpack, right?
Yeah.
And why specifically now in your preparation?
So context, this is a big hypoxic session. So using the altitude machine, the hypoxic generator, and it's all on the Stairmaster and the treadmill, because that's pretty much the only way you can use the hypoxic machine. You can't really do that outside because it weighs like 50 pounds and you can't move it with you. I did, I think, 3 of these sessions last summer, and I felt like they gave me a really nice bump in fitness. I thought it was a really good a little bit more controlled practice than the overnight stuff on Koto. A really good, just big chunk of hypoxic exposure all at once versus kind of like the 60 to 75 minutes on the bike, obviously 7-8 hours. It's like almost a week of that all in one go. Good practice fueling, good practice carrying a heavier pack. So a lot of the things that I want very specifically to train for Everest, running fast, like we talked about before, at like doing critical velocity at 15-minute race pace, is not specific to Everest training. There are benefits to that. There are cardiovascular benefits, but it's not specific. This is incredibly specific. The only thing that would make it more specific would be if it were, outside on snow. But again, we want to try and maximize the hypoxia here. So that's the reason that we're doing it inside. And we kind of couple it with those longer outdoor sessions that we do on Cotopaxi here, or once we get over to Nepal, maybe on Mera Peak there, for kind of the true terrain and gear testing and weather and all that stuff. So the specificity here, is the hypoxia, it's the pack weight, it's the fueling, and it's done in a pretty controlled environment where we can really focus on those things. The 6 to 8 hours, I felt like was right in the middle of, I think the first session I did over the summer was 5 hours, and the second one was 7, and the last one was 10 or something like that. So I think this season I'm only going to do 2, and so this was one of them, and then the next one will be probably around 10 hours right before I leave Quito. And part of that is because I can't do these sessions once I leave Quito, because in Kare, I don't have a Stairmaster or a treadmill because we barely have electricity up there. It's a miracle that I can run these machines at all. And I can basically just use it on the bicycle or on, just like sitting around or sleeping or something like that. So it's really my only opportunity to do these kind of workouts is here in Quito. So that was kind of the setup. And the 12 to 13 kilograms of weight, which, what is that? Maybe like 25 to 30 pounds. The idea is to train with a little bit more weight than I expect my Everest Summit pack to be, which I think will probably be more like 8 to 10 kilos, depending on how much food and water is in there at a given time. But again, the idea of over preparing a little bit so that 8 to 10 kilos doesn't feel so bad when you put it on for the first time. So that's kind of the background.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you did do this strange behavior of taking feeds without removing your altitude mask? Well, you have to remove
Well, no,
your altitude mask, but
I was removing the mask. Yeah.
without breathing. Yeah, without breathing outside the altitude mask. So you take a big breath, you take the mask off, you stuff your mouth full of food, you put the mask back on. This caused heart rate spikes from missing breaths. How critical is this skill forever? And what's the point and how hard was it to execute?
So the point is to try and not breathe regular air to try and keep the blood saturation, the blood oxygen saturation basically steady, so that you're really only breathing that hypoxic air for the entire time. It's a little bit uptight, but again, this is maybe my screw loose side coming through of just like, if I can figure it out, it's better. I don't know. It does feel there is a difference. Even if you take a couple of breaths, you feel a lot better really quickly. Oxygen is a hell of a drug, and I was trying to avoid that. So that was the idea, was avoid that, because realistically, yeah, once you start going up on Everest, I'm not using oxygen ever, so there's no relief. It's all just the air pressure. And I wanted to mimic that. That said, I don't think this is tremendously specific. I actually think it will be easier on Everest because I don't have to worry about the mask, and I can, there's no holding your breath or anything like that. Like, there is still a challenge sometimes of literally just like chewing or swallowing food, and maybe you miss a breath or two, and if you're at 8,000 meters and you miss 2 breaths and you're breathing, 60 times a minute or something, that's kind of a big problem. But overall, I'd say it was pretty specific to this machine. I kind of eventually got into a decent rhythm, and just like taking smaller bites of stuff and stuff like that to try and force myself to breathe a little bit more, because I did find I was kind of gasping, and heart rate, would spike 5 or 10 beats like right after I'd eat each time. But overall, I think it was pretty specific to these kind of workouts in the altitude mask versus being out in real life.
Okay. And then you did an enormous amount of caloric front loading. So you took 600 calories per hour at the beginning and the first couple of hours. So what was your thinking there, and how did it go? How was your stomach?
The stomach was really good. I don't know if we talked about this before. I met with the nutritionist from Morton back in, must have been like December of last year. And this is one of the things that we talked about, was this idea of purposefully kind of front loading and then tapering off nutrition a little bit with regards to Everest climb, because as you get higher and higher on the mountain, it's going to be harder and harder to digest food and, well, food, liquid, whatever. It's just harder for your GI tract to function. And the idea is, okay, if you can stomach and literally put down up, 600, 700, 800, whatever it is, if you can front load a little bit in those first, say, 4 to 6 hours, recognizing that the last 4 to 6 hours, maybe you're going to be under your goal. So if the goal is to average 400 calories an hour, for example, which is, 100 grams of carbohydrate. If that's the goal for the whole time, okay, maybe we do 600 for the first third, we do 400 right on target for the middle third, and then we do 200 for the last third, and then we end up kind of averaging out over that entire time. I think that's kind of the idea. So this is the first time I'd ever done that. And honestly, especially with like the whole like pulling the mask down and like holding your breath, like it was a humongous pain. I actually think it'll be easier again doing it outside, especially with some liquid calories in there too. But it was definitely good practice, and it was nice to see that, stomach wise, nausea wise, I had no issues, which personally I wasn't super surprised by that, because when we did that big Cotopaxi thing, I didn't have any stomach issues until 12 hours in. So 7 hours is honestly not that long. By comparison, I was like, if I have nausea problems, that's kind of an issue. So I was pleasantly not surprised that the stomach was all good.
So that makes sense. But one question I have beyond that as well, okay, as you get up near the top, it's not like your caloric needs decrease. You're just not able to take as many calories in because your digestive tract isn't happy with it. Is that the story?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, ideally, you would continue taking in as much as you can. You're trying to build yourself a buffer, I think, is the idea. Like, you're still going to be net negative regardless. It's really just, okay, can I make it less net negative? And if I, like on Cotopaxi, if I have an hour where I feel really nauseated and I just give my stomach a break and don't eat anything, I have enough of a buffer that's not going to be a critical error where suddenly I'm totally out of gas. It's like, okay, you've got a little bit of reserve from that beginning part.
Yep, that makes sense. And then you had some frustration here. Lost a contact lens early, dropped your earbuds, you actually stopped the machine a couple of times, and you noted this was very good practice to deal with frustration. So how did you manage the frustration and the crankiness of these kind of little ankle biter problems, as we call them?
Yeah, there were a lot of ankle biters. Gosh, there's, as much as I love the kind of predictability and consistency of working out in the gym and on the machines. There are a lot of like little frustrating things, and in particular things that happened on that day. Yeah, I rubbed my contact out of my eye, just like wiping sweat off my face within like the first 45 minutes. It's like, oh, for goodness sake, like this is ridiculous. I dropped one of my earbuds and it like disappeared into the bowels of the machine. I still haven't found it. The machine has a touchscreen, which, like, hot take, if anyone is listening to this who works in exercise equipment, anything that has sweat on it shouldn't have a touchscreen, or at least you should be able to disable the touchscreen and it should have physical buttons as well. Like, that just seems like such a no-brainer, because all you do is like you move your arm and suddenly like a drop of sweat hits the freaking stop button on the screen. Like, now you have to reset everything.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Those of us who take design seriously have noticed this for a long time.
It's why it's the same
one
design.
Of the many bad designs.
The watches that have touchscreens are ridiculous. Like, I think this watch actually does have a touchscreen, but I don't use it. I turn it off because it's ridiculous. Like, I run outside, I sweat.
I can't. I have an Apple Watch, and it drives me nuts because if you're working out, it will just stop working, and you have some buttons, but there are a lot of things you can't do without touching the watch face, and you're trying to wipe your fingers somewhere that's dry. If you're sweating a lot, it gets really hard.
Yep.
Yeah. It's crazy.
So,
bad design.
To get back to the original question, I think that for me the way to deal with that in the moment and looking ahead is basically just to try and laugh it off. I think is the best way that I found, and think of it more as just, okay, this is ridiculous and funny, especially in this kind of circumstance where it's a workout. Looking to it as like, okay, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to practice this now and practice being frustrated by stuff that objectively doesn't really matter. It's just kind of stupid and annoying, like you said. It doesn't really matter if I have to stop the machine for 30 seconds and then start it again. Like, it doesn't matter at all. It's better to deal with this stuff now and, again, practice those little frustrations and practice dealing with them in a positive way, because, yeah, I'm not going to be on a machine, but like weird little shit like that will happen on Everest. Hopefully I don't blink out a contact lens at like 28,000 feet or something, but something will happen that I'm not predicting. And how I react to that is important. And the more that I can let that reaction be okay, this is pretty funny that this is happening and I'm having to deal with this and I'm just going to figure it out, versus like getting frustrated or, angry or, super down on myself. Like, that's what I'm trying to accomplish.
Okay. All right. And then another interesting thing that happened was you had this physiological shift around the fifth or sixth hour, between those hours, and your heart rate and lactate both drop significantly during that time frame, despite maintaining the same pace. So do you know what's happening there? Can you explain what happened? Is this like second wind, circadian rhythms, just metabolic efficiency? Do you have any idea?
So I was surprised by this. I asked Dr. Claude of AI Anthropic, about this, and what Dr. Claude, I think I teased this before, what Dr. Claude told me is this is a classic sign of metabolism switching from carbohydrate to fat metabolism is what's happening. Mm-hmm. That after this time, you probably burned through a lot of the muscle glycogen that you had starting the workout. Yes, you're taking on extra calories, but you're not quite making up for it. And so you're crossing some point where you're going from, some amount of carbohydrate metabolism to fat metabolism, and whatever, some line has been crossed where now you are suddenly burning fat, which is generating less lactate and is slightly more efficient metabolically in terms of heart rate. So I think that's what's happening. I did a little bit more homework and I trust Dr. Claude's interpretation of that. And it's a pretty interesting thing to see. I think the other thing is also dehydration. Actually, we'll get into that in the next one. But, I was kind of purposefully under hydrating on this, as is going to be kind of necessary on the mountain. And that's another thing that can, especially with heart rate, can lower heart rate. I don't know exactly the physiological mechanics behind that, but that's another one. So yeah, it's basically, I think it's a good thing, is what Dr. Claude said, because it's showing, okay, you have a really efficient fat metabolism, which we hope. And, I saw that in the December testing at Human Powered Health in Wellesley, and hopefully that's gotten even stronger. And that's exactly what we want, because as I was saying before, you're never going to be able to fully replenish what you're doing in like an ultramarathon effort in terms of carbohydrate intake. Yep. But the idea is to have that transition or have that balance of energy systems be as efficient as possible, so that you can maintain that moderate zone 2 for basically ever.
Yep. Yep. Good. Okay. And then speaking of thirst, so you said you purposely underdrank to mimic the stretch from C4 Camp 4 for those on Everest, the highest camp, so the last camp you get to before the summit. So you wanted to mimic the stretch from Camp 4 to the summit and back. And you only had 1.2 liters over 7+ hours. So by the end, you were, in your words, extremely thirsty, which I can imagine after, especially if you're sweating a lot and it's been 7 hours. And Anna bringing Powerade was a huge relief, quote unquote. So what did this teach you?
I might need another half liter or something to get through that amount of time. The other thing is the gym is really, really warm compared to being up on a big mountain. I mean, you do lose a ton of water through respiration, especially when you're breathing really hard, like a lot, like 60, 80 times a minute, which you're doing up high. So you do lose a lot of respiration. You're still sweating, even if it's very cold. You're losing a lot of water. So it's nothing to sneeze at, but I do think, once we start doing stuff in real cold, and, I'm going to Cotopaxi actually tomorrow when we're recording this, and I think that'll be a better point of comparison. And then once we get to Nepal and I have the chance to do 1 or 2 long days on an actual big mountain, I think that'll be a better point of comparison. But I think, maybe bring in a little bit more water, and then also maybe trying to preload the water a little bit more. That morning, drinking a lot of water with electrolytes, things like that. I think that's a big point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then again, using your own words, you felt you were nowhere near your limit, nowhere near my limit in your words. And so even in the final hour when you were extremely thirsty, in your log you wrote, I didn't feel anywhere near my limit. If you told me I had to go for another hour, I don't think it would have been a problem. That sounds great. What does that tell you about your readiness for Everest?
I think one of my strengths in general is this ability to not think too far ahead. So I don't really think about what it says for Everest. I think more about what it says for the next workout that I have to do like this, which is that it'll be fine. Because if you told me even that I had to do 10 hours that day when I did 7.5, I'd be like, yeah, okay. Like I was definitely ready to be done. Like you're on the Stairmaster for 7.5 hours. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to be finished with this. And I was pretty tired afterwards. But in that moment, I think the big thing was, sometimes if you run a race, for example, like the 7th hour is going to feel so much harder than the 3rd hour, because you're approaching that point of failure. And I didn't feel like I was anywhere close to that. I think, the 3rd hour definitely felt harder than the 1st hour, but I don't think the 7th hour felt any different than the 3rd hour, I guess is how I would put it. It just, it felt like this is not tremendously comfortable, but also there's nothing objective happening right now that's a problem that means that I'm going to have to stop soon. It's just, okay, if I keep eating and drinking and, reading or watching dumb TV or whatever it is that I'm doing, I think I could probably pretty much do this forever.
Okay. That's where you want to be. And so in comparison to last summer, you noted this was much stronger even than the last summer sessions. So give us a little breakdown of that. What specifically feels better? Is it the mental side, the physical side, more than that? What made you make that comment?
I think it was all the above. I think when I originally wrote that, I was objectively comparing just the speed and the heart rate because I did this pretty much almost exactly the same last summer. I think if anything, this workout was significantly higher altitude, and I think the speed was either the same or a little bit higher. So to me, that's the most important thing is, okay, the fitness is showing that I'm able to maintain a slightly higher speed for the same amount of time at a higher altitude. That's great. That means I'm, if anything, a little bit fitter than I was at this time last year, which is great because that's kind of how we always want to be. I think everything else was really good and pretty comparable. The fueling was really good. I think both times mentally, I think I did well both times. And overall, I think that sensation of just, like I said, not having any kind of terminal feeling in that last hour or two, just feeling, okay, yeah, this is kind of hard, but it's okay. I remember especially the first one that I did last summer, that last hour or two feeling like, oh gosh, this is pretty hard. And that was, I think, only 5 or 6 hours. So having this be the first one and having it feel like I really hit the right energy system and kept it in the right effort level, that was really, really important to me.
Good. Okay. And hopefully that's a reflection of all the lactate testing and everything else you've learned over this time. Okay.
Yeah.
And then on Saturday after that, big hypoxic session, your resting HR was under 40 a bunch, to use a technical phrase that you use. So what does that metric tell you? Anything in particular about where you are in your cardiovascular adaptation and your recovery?
This is another one I asked Dr. Claude about because I was very surprised. Like usually when I do a really hard day, the next day my resting heart rate will be a little bit elevated, if anything. So if it's normally maybe 41, 42, maybe it'll be 45 the next day after a pretty hard day, and then it'll come back down. And that's, my layman's understanding is basically your body is just working harder to adapt after a really hard training session. And there's a bunch of repairing and recovery going on. So I was very surprised to see under 40. That's never seen my resting heart rate in the 30s in Quito up this high. I think what Dr. Claude said, actually, I won't say I think, what Dr. Claude said was that when you do a really long exposure to that level of hypoxia, this is basically the supercompensation effect that you're seeing on the other side of that. So your body, yes, there's repair and stuff going on, but from a cardiovascular perspective, there are things that are happening even in that like 7 hours of exposure, like your blood stroke volume is increasing, things like that. I can't remember all of them, but that's the big one, is your stroke volume of blood is increasing. Maybe your plasma volume actually increases a little bit, even like in like a matter of a day. And that's why suddenly, okay, your heart doesn't have to beat as fast to deliver as much blood. And I actually saw this over the next few days, was not just my resting heart rate, but even the little recovery efforts that I did. My heart rate was much lower, like 10 or 15 beats lower than normal at the same effort. And that lasted maybe that 2 or 3 day window after that workout. So pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, and then looking at the arc from post-Cotopaxi recovery through this breakthrough session on Saturday and this massive hypoxic session. So how would you overall characterize where your fitness is compared to where you needed to be for Everest?
Well, I can't remember who it was. It was either Adrian Ballinger or Kilian Jornet, both of them maybe. I was watching interviews or videos with them about Everest, and both of them basically said, you need to be as fit as you've ever been in your life to go to Everest. So it's like, okay. Well, I've already done it twice, but I guess I need to be a little fitter each time. And I think that's the standard that I hold myself to is, it didn't happen last time. So, okay, I'll go in a little bit fitter and hope it's a little bit luckier of a day. And, that fitness can solve some of those problems. And I think that's exactly where we are. I think everything, it's the same exact pattern that we talked about of like month to month, but you're looking at it year to year, is you want to be able to look back at what you did a year ago or 5 years ago and see, okay, I'm doing things now that I couldn't do then. And not that I'm pushing, but just that now it's more appropriate. I'm just fitter. And that happens like compound interest. It's not any one really sexy, flashy workout. It's just every single day, putting in the work, hitting those, B plus workouts every day, week after week, season after season, year after year. You don't see it. It's like watching the grass grow until all of a sudden you look back and you look at a year ago or you look at a couple of years ago and you say, oh, wow, I'm way fitter than I was then. And to me, that's the exciting part, is looking not just at this season and last summer, but even looking back to, before Manaslu and, I'm so much fitter than I was before Manaslu, so much stronger. And that obviously went really well. So the fitness, I think, is right where I want it to be. And now it's just about continuing on with these good, not great days, having some great days, having some not as great days, and moving on from those, but keeping the trend moving in the right direction.
Okay. And then looking forward, you mentioned one more go at Cotopaxi and one more big hypoxic session. Walk us through these last few weeks before you go to Nepal and leave Quito, and what are the big goals and milestones that you have in mind for these sessions, and what are you most excited about?
Yeah, those are the two biggest workouts I'll do between now and when I leave. So Cotopaxi, like I said, I'm actually leaving tomorrow. So that'll be tomorrow night into Friday morning. We're recording this on the 18th. So that's one really big one. That'll be actually quite a bit shorter than last time. I think 8 to 10 hours is what we're looking at. So basically just doing the overnight. I want to try starting at 8 p.m., which is probably about when I'll start on Everest. So kind of practicing what to do with that day. If I want to take a nap, seeing how that feels, making sure I'm not too groggy, getting started, things like that. But yeah, doing the whole night. I think the mountain is in really good condition right now, so hopefully be able to do laps all the way to the summit, but we'll see. And then, like we were talking about before, one more hypoxic session right before I leave. So that's kind of the two bookends of this last 3 weeks or so here in Quito will be that big Cotopaxi overnight and then a nice little recovery block. And then we have kind of a mini block, which I think is maybe 10 or 11 days that'll take me to right before I fly back to Boston. And the focus of that is that hypoxic session at the very end, but we'll have a handful of double T days and everything sprinkled in there as well. So those are the really big things, I think, in terms of milestones, goals. But mostly I just want to really just focus on getting those moderate days. Yeah, it's funny. It goes all the way back to like my senior year of high school with cross country. John Waldron, my coach, who was new for my senior year and who's been a very important person in my life. I remember my best friend Duncan Sherwood Forbes and I would tease playfully, and because John would always say, okay, today we're going to do a moderate run at moderate intensity. And now here we are like almost 20 years later, and it's kind of the same idea. It's like every day just kind of wants to be pretty moderate, pretty good. Sometimes you have really good days and that's about it. But that's it. It's just like really focusing on this routine that I have here that's working really well. It's really tiring. It's a lot of work, but I'm really grateful for it. I'm really enjoying it, and enjoying my last few weeks in Quito and just the privilege that I have to be able to train basically all day, every day, and focus on that. And grateful for my body for putting up with it. And I'm very, very excited to see you guys and then get over to Nepal and start playing around in the big mountains. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to see you too. So that's the last question I have. Anything else you wanted to add that we didn't cover?
No, I think that's it. It's been a long one, so we won't do a cool down. And I will just read us out, and we'll be back soon. So thanks, everybody, as always, for listening. Please send any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@joski.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can also read my raw training logs on my blog at tylercandrews.com, or get that delivered to your inbox via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Ty's Training is a Chosky Media production brought to you by the good folks at the Chosky Foundation, the world's only nonprofit supporting coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Ciao.